kingdom, the kind of science that would make our heads spin. The guy is a world-class mind, and he's also a deeply committed follower of Jesus Christ. And you have guys like N.T. Wright, who is one of the most foremost historians that we have ever had on this planet, and also a powerful teacher of theology and the truth of Jesus Christ. And we can go on and on and on and on about guys who, men and women, who are powerful minds, who have found pursuit and belief in the existence of God, and pursuit in a life of discipleship and after Jesus Christ, followers of Jesus Christ, who are honest and intelligent and thoughtful people. And so the challenge is that Christian faith is not rational. They don't necessarily hold up, both in the intellectual world, but in the practical world as well. And so hopefully this morning I can give us a little bit of space this morning. I can push back some of the attacks and the challenges to the theistic argument a little bit this morning. Nothing that I say is going to be definitive, like this proves it. Right? Everything, if you're smart enough and you think about it enough, you can figure out ways around everything I'm going to say. But what I'm hoping to do is present enough evidence to you that you can realize that, wait a minute, although I can find a way around this, should I? Is that what I should be doing? Is that the best use of my intellect when it comes to this evidence, is to try to disprove it? Or could there be some truth behind the evidence that we see? And this week we're going to be talking about the existence of God. So hopefully this is a rational response. So if you're thinking caps on, I'm going to go quickly through a lot of this stuff. It's not because the information's not there, it's just because it's so much. And they use big words that I don't understand. Like, you can do the research. If anything sparks your interest, write it down, take a picture of it with your phone, ask me afterwards. Do the research. It's there. I'm going to go through it quickly just because there's a lot, not because I'm trying to hide over the weakness of the arguments. But we are going to just kind of run through this, and hopefully as we go, you can see that there is evidence that gives us space to encounter Jesus Christ in our lives. And the evidence number one that I want to start with is the evidence from existence. And the question that we ask is, why is there stuff at all? Why do we exist at all? Why does stuff happen? Like, why is there something rather than nothing? Is there evidence in the existence of that we can find God in this evidence here? So the cosmological argument is this cool word that just basically means this. When we look at the cosmos, when we look at the universe, the second law of thermodynamics says that energy runs out. It's much more complex than that, but basically means this, that eventually the universe is going to run out of energy. And because of that, and the fact that we haven't done it yet, and the fact that I'm long-winded up here, it proves the fact that we have not run out of energy. I had my coffee this morning, I'm full of energy. Now, if the energy will eventually run out, and we haven't run out of energy yet, it tells us that the universe can't be infinite. Right? It can't be infinite. It had to have a start because it hasn't been done yet. So it started at some point and is still continuing towards this eventual running out of energy. The second thing is the Big Bang Theory, which is basically accepted scientifically throughout the scientific community as this idea that the universe had a beginning. Because the universe is expanding, they extrapolated back there. At one point, if you turn back the dial of time, it will contract until this one point. And what's interesting is this point of the Big Bang is this thing that they call an infinitesimally small, but infinitesimally dense point where nothing else existed but it did. And the laws of science and the laws of nature broke down. We can't study anything before this infinitesimally small, infinitesimally dense point in which everything came from. And for me, that sounds like a lot of nothing, right? I mean, you can't really describe it, and nothing makes sense. Everything you point at it doesn't work. I mean, it's like nothing. It's like trying to figure out nothing. So the point is, the universe had a beginning, and it started. And so we ask ourselves, we don't have this infinite chain, right? Every movement that we have, every effect that we can see had a cause or had something that moved it.
That's right.
And you keep going back. Okay, if I push the ball down the hill, well, I'm the mover. but then what created me? What gave me the energy? And we can keep moving back. And, well, I'm a product of this earth. Well, where does this earth come from? It became part of our galaxy. Where other galaxies come from? And we keep moving back in this kind of infinite chain. At some point, there has to be a beginning. We know that we're pretty sure that the universe had a beginning, and we look back and we can't move infinitely back. Everything can't have a cause. At some point, there has to be something that's an uncaused cause. Something had to be the finger that pushed the dominoes. At the beginning, there had to be some sort of unmoved mover.
That's right.
Right? Something had to start all this, and we don't know what it was. It's beyond, right? If it's before this infinitely small, infinitely dense point, which is beyond our ability to study in the natural world, it's by definition, it's above or it's super to nature. It would be what we consider super natural. Now, you can try to figure out whatever you want there. You can say it is, you come up with whatever you want that is the unmoved mover or the uncaused cause, but it does ask the question, well, what pushed that first domino? What hit the start button? What caused the Big Bang? What is the beginning of all of this? Genesis 1 says this, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light.
Amen.
It's interesting is the theology that came from Genesis in the church history has been this. From nothing, God created everything.
Yes.
Ex nihilo. From nothing, God's word was what started it off. Maybe God said bang, and there's big stuff happening. For the Bible, and this is ancient scripture, but it's not before the Big Bang, right? From the pre-scientific community comes this explanation of how God created everything. Psalm 19 says it this way: the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, and night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, and no sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. The psalmist is saying, when we examine the heavens and the stars and the creation around us, it is crying out to us. Not using words, but their very existence of the truth of God. Arno Penzias is a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, says this. He's an atheist as well. He says the best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. And what he's saying is this, that what we have, the evidence that we have, in existence, and in the universe, and what we see is understand from the cosmos is this. It makes sense exactly the way the scriptures wrote where we came from and why existence is here. Is this irrefutable? No, of course not. There's other explanations for this. And maybe you say we're never going to know what the unmoved mover was, or we can't know what the uncaused cause was. But which is more reliant on faith? We all come from nothing just because, or when we look around, the fact that we're here sure seems to point towards God. Evidence number 1, that's from evidence from existence. Evidence number 2 is evidence from order, and this for me is really fascinating. It's why does nature work? Why does stuff work? If you have kids, you know that if you leave them alone, nature goes towards chaos. You walk into a room, you're like, you don't even own this many toys. How are they reproducing and all spread out on your floor? Nature, we think, man, we should be moving towards chaos, but when we look around at nature, it seems like we're not there. We haven't broken down into just this chaotic being. So a couple things here that I want to just go through really quickly. One is the watchmaker's dilemma. And I'm not irrefutable, but it's interesting. So if you're walking in the woods and you stumble upon a stone, you can look down and be like, oh, it's a rock, and you kick it out of the way, and you're like, it's just a rock. But if you're walking through the woods and you stumble upon a pocket watch and you pick it up, you wouldn't say, oh, man, what a weird thing to find in nature, and toss it around away. What you would think would be, wow, someone lost their pocket watch. watch, and you look at that pocket watch and you think, well, someone made this. It's obvious that it's been made. And the argument is for the complexity of nature blows a pocket watch's complexity out of the water. It is so finely tuned to fit in with itself and to function as a whole and to work. Sure seems like it was designed to do so. And that's kind of the watch magazine. When we examine in all sorts of things, from the smallest of the small to the biggest of the big, we see that things work in this kind of amazing connectedness that seems like it was designed to work this way. And does it have to be? No, I mean, you can work ways around it, but it seems like things function so well together that they must have been designed. This idea of irreducible complexity. When Darwin wrote his treatise on evolution of the species, it gave those who were atheists kind of a way to explain how we became to be, right? And the theory of evolution, I am not someone who wants to throw that out the window. I'm not. And if you want to talk to me later about it, I often think of this. If you give me a computer, if you're a computer programmer, and you give me a computer program, and then it has bugs, and I have to call you and you come and fix it, and then it has more bugs, and I have to call you again and come and fix it, I think, well, that's, he's a computer programmer. But if you give me a program that as the bugs come up, it fixes itself, I think, man, that guy must have the right program. And so for me, when I look at the evolutionary biology, I think, man, God may have the right program. Right? And that's how I see it. And we can argue differently, but so I'm not anti-evolution. But in the theory of evolution, there's these problems with this idea of irreducible complexity, which says this. Biology says that as long as, these little changes, and some of these changes helped organisms exceed and succeed in life and pass their dreams. And so this kind of huge amount of time with this kind of specific changes created the kind of complexity in nature that we have now. The fact that we do what we do and say what we say and act the way we do, we can trace it back kind of through evolution to understand why. But one of the things that there are these irreducible complexities where you say, how did the eye just kind of happen to work out? It is unbelievably complex. It needed like a million different nerves to fit into a million different nerve sockets, and then all of them had to communicate in a single way to the brain. And so for this thing to just kind of happen, like the probability of that happening is just astronomical. And why were those nerves just chilling there without nerve sockets and just happen when they connected to actually work? But what is that? Where did they come from in the first place, and why would those have been something that were always there? And when you start asking these questions, you have this issue with this irreducible complexity argument. Now, it's not airtight. I mean, people can have come up with solutions to it or ways around it, but sometimes they're a little bit like, really? Yeah, sure, I guess that's something. But so it's this idea of the Washmaker dilemma and irreducible complexity gives us what's called a teleological argument. That says when you look at the unbelievable design of the way that nature fits together, it seems like it was designed by a watchmaker, and not just simply by time plus chance plus a little bit of changes here and there gives us what we have today. But even going further is what's called the anthropic principle, which may be for me the most powerful evidence from creation to the fact that this was designed, and it goes like this. Life happened, and complex life happened. But in order for it to happen, I want you to think about this wall behind you is filled with dials. Hundreds upon hundreds of dials. And every dial had to be exactly tuned to a specific point in order for life to happen here on Earth. And now you can say, well, life did happen, so of course it had to be that way. But the example of that is if we're playing poker, and every time I deal, I get 4 aces. By the 100th time I deal myself 4 aces, you're going to say, you're cheating. And I'm like, no, like it just happens to be, we're just living in a universe in which this happens. How amazing is that? But the truth of it is, I would still get shot. That's kind of the way it works. And so when we look at the fine-tuning of both the universe and our earth, it begins to say, if one of these things was just a little bit off, complex life wouldn't have happened. And you start thinking, well, man, that's a lot. And then you add something else, and like, man, that's even less probable, and that's even less probable. And so, is it airtight? No, but it is compelling. And so let me just read something. So let's talk about the universe's fine-tuning to allow life. And this comes from all sorts of different people, both theistic and atheistic, who have noticed that this is what was necessary for life to happen. Tiny variations in one of numerous elements of the natural laws within the universe would have made life impossible. So the tiniest change in oxygen content levels, the tiniest changes to the atomic weight of many different elements. So several different elements have to be exactly the atomic weight they are in order for us to be alive. Tiny changes in gravitational force or centrifugal force, or rate of universe expansion, distance between stars, or distance between galaxies. A tiny shift in the velocity of light, or the relationship between molecular forces, and life couldn't exist. In the universe, life couldn't exist anywhere if stars weighed different, or if they were closer or farther apart, or if the universe had been expanding a little bit longer, or if it just seems to be like it was fine-tuned for us to be alive right now. But that's just the universe. Let's talk about our Earth. Life on Earth is made possible because Jupiter is where it is. If Jupiter wasn't there, we all thought it was pointless. It's not. If Jupiter kind of sucks in some of the bigger asteroids, so life on Earth is made possible by Jupiter being exactly where it is. The moon being in the exact position to the Earth that it is. The Earth being in the exact position to the sun that it is. And to the asteroid belt. If we were closer or farther away, it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have been able to have life here. So the Earth's crust has to be exactly as thick as it is. We have to rotate it exactly the speed that we do. Our planet's surface had to be within 5 degrees of what it is. Seismic activity has to be what it is. Volcanic activity, the atmospheric discharge being perfectly tuned. Oxygen and nitrogen levels, carbon dioxide levels, atmospheric electrical discharge, ozone levels, water vapor levels. I don't even know what some of this stuff is. There's on and on and on. These things had to be fine-tuned to allow us to have life here. Now my question is, it is this way, and we are here. So we can say, well, man, we lucked out. Or we can say, well, there's someone who's fine-tuning this.
Yes.
And it seems like it's fine-tuning it. And then we look at the probability, because the probability of things just happening to be this way is astronomical. And when I mean astronomical, I mean this. The probability is 1 and a number, and that number is greater than the number of particles in the universe. So the probability of this is just absurd. Basically, 0. Stephen Hawking, would not be theistic. He says this: the odds of the universe like ours rising out of something like the Big Bang, the odds are enormous. It would be very difficult to explain why the universe would have begun in just this way, except the act of God, who intended to create beings like us.
Whoa.
So he says it would be very difficult to explain why. And then later on in his life, he goes into trying to explain why it happened without God. And over and over and over again, guys have tried to explain how this happened without God. It's understandable. And honestly, some of them have come up with some pretty brilliant solutions. But the question I want to ask, and I ask myself often, is which one requires more faith out of me?
All right.
And why are we so determined to close our eyes to certain elements of evidence? Is it because there just isn't enough of it? Or do we have other motivations behind it? And I'm asking you the same thing. Which takes more faith for us to believe? The universe has been fine-tuned. Romans 1, Paul says, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because it has been made plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. What Paul is saying here is when we look hard at creation, it cries out for a creator.
Yeah.
The world, the universe has been fine-tuned to allow us to exist. So evidence to the argument from order. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to start looking instead outside to within us. And the evidence 3 I would like to present to you is for the existence of God is the evidence for morality. Why do we have good and evil? You don't have to teach your kids good and evil. They come hardwired with it.
That's right.
Good and evil is something that is as universal as something we have in humanity. Good and evil. And I ask you, some of you may say, well, it's just culturally developed. It's something that one culture says one thing's evil and the other culture says another thing's evil, and really we should let people kind of decide for themselves and govern themselves. And I don't know if, is there really universally good and universally evil? I don't know if that's true. And so I would ask you this question. Is there anything happening in the world today that regardless of how people felt about it, you would stop if you could?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how many of you, if you had a chance to stop child sex trafficking, would not do it on the grounds of, well, that culture thinks it's okay? None of us would do that. And none of us, in your explanation, well, that's just my cultural bias, wouldn't get you to that point. You'd be like, no, it's wrong. Like, what about, no, it's wrong. I don't care what you have to say, it's wrong. Whatever evidence you have, no, it's wrong. I know it's wrong. And why do you know it's wrong? Because you put together the argument? No, you know it on a gut level. And what's interesting is psychologists have done this study on people. Almost all of our moral decisions that we make are gut level decisions. We make the decision, and we come up with the reasons behind it. It's one of the reasons why we struggle when we're on opposite ends of that question to actually have any kind of dialogue with them. Is because it has very little to do with the evidence that we're actually saying it does. These are gut level things. Immanuel Kant, who is a great philosopher, says this: there's two things that fill the mind with ever-increasing wonder and awe. Number one is the starry heavens above, and the second is the moral law within. These two things, what he's saying is what captures my attention more than anything else. The amazingness of the universe, and then that moral law that's within us.
Amen.
It's one of my favorite. Ravi Zacharias says this: when confronted by the murder of children, we may be able to deny the existence of evil, but we cannot deny the feeling of evil. Our minds may try to deny the truth that our hearts will always know. There is a moral law, and there is such a thing as evil.
Amen.
You don't have to teach people this. We come with it hardwired. You don't have an option. Matter of fact, those who have acted in evil ways often show significant psychological damage that got them that way. You have to fight really hard to get rid of this idea that's embedded in your soul that some things are good and some things are evil. So what do we do with that? Paul says this: they show that the requirements of the law have been written on their hearts. He's talking about people who've never heard the truth of Jesus before. He says they already know that it's true. Their consciousness also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and other times even defending them. He's saying the moral code that God has written on the hearts of every single one of us. That's one of the reasons that the truth of Jesus Christ sparks something within you.
That's right.
It's because you start to connect, and not just what feels right or wrong, but the truth that God has given us something to do with it. And so, I don't want to go down that path too much this morning, it's not my point, but there's evidence that we can see within our own hearts that we believe that some things are wrong, and you don't have a good reason for it. They just are. And the Bible says the good reason that you have for that is you were created with the image of God stamped within you.
Yes, yes.
So why do we have good and evil? Is there ways of getting around it? Yeah, there are kind of evolutionary, biological ways of this is what was good for us as a people, and this is what helped us succeed as a species over other species and all that. But when you kind of have them lay it out, one of the things is, again, it takes a lot of faith to get there. And that doesn't really connect to, I don't feel like I'm trying to make a decision based on what's good for my species or what's good for my genes. And that doesn't feel like what's going on here. Maybe it is.
Yeah.
Or maybe God stamped his truth in my heart. I don't know.
All right. All right.
And this is my last set of evidence, and we're going to end with this, and I don't want to go on forever, but There's so much here. And it's not, again, hopefully you see that. I'm not just trying to say, look, I'm right and other people who disagree with me are wrong. But what I'm saying is, like, I feel like there's space here to say, hey, belief in God is something that I can do honestly and openly. All right, evidence number 4 is from life experience. Why is life so full of the transcendent? Why is life so full of the transcendent? And I'm going to start with this. Love and beauty. Love and beauty are things that we don't have to explain to people. They just kind of get them intrinsically. One of the things C.S. Lewis, who's a great, he's an apologist, he's an author, he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, he was a great Christian thinker, but he started off his adult life as an atheist. And one of the things that he couldn't get away with is that his mind believed that there was no God, but his heart kept being captured by what he calls joy. These moments where his experiences took him up past just what was practical, what he could explain. You ever stood and saw a beautiful vista? We're looking out, I think about on 64, you can park and there's an overlook, and you look out over this amazing view of the valley, and it's like your heart's like that. It feels like, man, this is amazing. Is it just because biologically we knew that there's probably food out there, so it's something that evolved within us? Or do we say, God, that's amazing creation? Yeah. You're an amazing creator. And why is love such a powerful motivator? For those of you who've lived long enough, you know that love makes you do stupid things. All the time. Oh, why am I doing that? And guess what? That's a universal experience. Right? People do dumb things in love for the history of humanity. So you're not alone. And it seems to draw us, like when you're in love with someone and you're just kind of connecting to that person, is it a good explanation that, it's just your brain chemistry is a certain set and hormones at a certain level, and that's what creates this connection so biologically? You're like, yeah, that's crap. Like, we don't like love songs. Every other song on the radio is about this subject because, our brain chemistry is like, no. It's because there's something transcendent in there. I can stay in this forever, but why is love so important? Why is beauty a constant? Why, if each and every one of us believe to our very core that we have free will? Without God, free will is you're just a cause and effect machine.
That's right.
And how many of you believe that? None of it. You may say you believe it, you may think you believe it, but you don't act like you believe it. You believe to your very core that you are a free thinker and you have free will.
Amen.
Why? There's no good reason for it, but you do. How come? And another one is this. How come you're here today? How come you're listening? If God didn't exist, if there is no God and really humanity is just this blip on the radar screen of existence, you can make a really good argument that without God, all things are permissible. Because really, who cares? If you're the only one that benefits from your decision, why does it matter? Your life is short, and existence is short. And when you look at the thing on the huge time scale of the universe, it doesn't really matter. You have very little foundation for believing that you matter or what you say matters or the way you think matters. That's not the way we act. We act with this deep conviction that who we are matters and what we say matters.
Yes.
And the fact that we are fighting tooth and nail in our own culture right now is because we believe these things matter.
That's right.
And they do. They do matter. But you don't have a really good explanation unless you're saying, there's someone who is above all this that we are accountable for that has said the way you treat people matters.
Yes. Yes.
The value in which you live your life matters.
Yes.
So your life matters. Even when you feel like you messed it up or that you have all sorts of, you matter. We believe that.
Amen.
We believe that. We act like we do. How come? How come? And how come this desire for the divine is a constant in human experience? St. Augustine says this in his Confessions. He says, God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find rest in you. You can see the restlessness of people seeking God, searching for Him over and over, just all across humanity, or seeking God. And even those who deny the existence of of God or the spiritual, they seek other things with a kind of religious fervor. We have this desire to have something bigger than us, to explain to us who we are and why what we are doing matters. We desire the divine in our lives. C.S. Lewis says this: hunger. We have this desire for food, and it has a solution to it. You need something. When you get tired, there's a solution for it. You can sleep. When you're thirsty, there's a solution for it. You can drink. Every kind of desire and urge that we have as people can find a solution in this existence around us. And he says, I believe, C.S. Lewis says, I believe it's the same thing with our deep desire for the divine. God created you with a desire for the divine. Why? So that you can connect to something bigger than you. And then he answers that question like nothing else can. Blaise Pascal famously wrote, we all have a God-shaped vacuum inside of us. And we try to fill it with whatever we can find. But only God fits in that space. That's number 4, from life experience. Now listen, all of these things you can work yourself around. I'm not saying you can't. And many people do. Being an atheist, not believing in people who are authentic and honest thinkers often arrive at being atheists and not believing in God. But it's also, there's a lot of evidence that we can look at, both from the world around us and from our heart within us into our communities surrounding us, that say maybe there's a lot of space here for us to have faith. Evidence 1 from the existence. Why is there anything at all? Evidence 2, the evidence of order. Why do things work out? Why is it fine-tuned for us? Why do we have the evidence 3 from morality? Why is there good and evil that we all believe in? Evidence number 4, why is life experience so full of this desire and connection to the divine? So I'm going to end, and I'm going to ask Shelley if she'll come back, and we're going to just end with this. I like this pursuit not just because it makes me right, but it gives me space for this relationship that's at the core of my being. See, people don't come to connect to Christ because of the great arguments. The great arguments of apologetics give space for people to recognize the goodness of God in their lives. It gives them the ability to connect to the truth that He loves you, that He has purpose for you, that you were designed on purpose and with purpose, that the way you live your life and the relationships that you have, they matter.
Amen.
You feel like they matter, it's because they do matter. It's because it's not because you're crazy and you're going against this kind of evolutionary biology. No, you feel the way you do because it makes sense, because it's a connection to God's truth alive in your life.
Yes, yes.
I'm going to read 1 Corinthians. This is probably, outside of Jesus, this is Paul writing. He's the smartest person in the early church. He was brilliant. He had basically memorized what we call the Old Testament. He'd been identified as kind of a ascending scholar and teacher, and people gravitated to him because of his brilliance. And he writes this. This is what I'm in. 1 Corinthians, he's sharing with the church. He says, "For since the wisdom of the world, through its wisdom, did not know Him, God was pleased that through the foolishness of what was preached, to save those who believe. See, Jews demand signs, and Greeks look for wisdom, and 21st century Americans need rational, reasonable arguments." So Paul says, that's not what we did. We preached Christ crucified. He said this was a stumbling block to Jews, and it was foolishness to Gentiles, and there was not enough evidence for 21st century Americans, and it was something that caused you to be uncomfortable and change things. And he says, we preach Christ crucified. Why?
Yes.
Even though it's a stumbling block to some and foolishness to others, but to those of us who connect to it, for those of us who have been given the space so we can see the truth of who Jesus was, Paul says, for those of us that God has called, both Jews and Greeks, and 21st century Americans, and people living in Charlottesville, For those of us who have been called by God, the stumbling block and this foolishness of Christ crucified is the power of God.
Amen.
And it's the wisdom of God.
Amen.
And so it was with me, brothers and sisters, Paul. When I came to you, I didn't come with eloquence of human wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Why one of the most brilliant minds that the Christian church has ever seen? Why would he resolve to know nothing? Because he says this, that the foolishness of God, foolishness that in all of this huge cosmos that he cares about you and your relationships in your lives, the foolishness that in all of this, that you matter to him, and that he was willing not just to say that you matter, but prove it by coming to earth and suffering everything. He says this foolishness, listen, it was hard for them to believe in the first century as it is the 21st century. This has never been easy. But he says this, if you allow it to, will capture your attention. It is the power of God and the wisdom of God and the beauty of God and the kindness of God that Paul says draws us to him. Apologetics isn't about proving that we're right. It's about giving God space in our lives to connect with us. Guys, give them space. I'm not saying forget about your doubts. That's why I started there. But understand that your doubts have an end. No matter what you're going to believe, you can question it with all sorts of good doubts. No matter what step you take. Don't you let the foolishness and the stumbling block of Christ crucified become his wisdom and his power.
Yes, that's good. Come on.
Hey God, you're good to us. We started off saying that. Give me faith. Give me faith. That word faith isn't, hey, we've proven everything and we know without a shadow of doubt. No. That faith is, in the midst of all of this, I will choose to follow you.
Yes.
Because you're good and your love is great and you have something for me. I pray for those who come into this room that are carrying the heavy weight of doubts that have been unexamined or unanswered.
Oh, Jesus.
Or maybe some of us who have experienced tragedy in our lives. And we're going to deal with this in a couple weeks, but that tragedy that blinds us from your goodness. Maybe we don't feel like seeing your goodness because how are you good when I've gone through so much? And God, you don't look at us and scowl at us at our doubts and our questions, but it's your kindness that draws us in. And sometimes we need to just make space in our lives for us to encounter you. So God, I ask that you would help us to make that space. To allow you, the foolishness and the craziness to think that the creator of this universe cares about me. God, I ask that you would help us to see that truth in our lives. You help us to allow the evidence to give us space to connect to your goodness and your kindness. As you draw us to you. So help us to connect to you. And I pray a blessing on your church, that this is your church, that everyone here is drawn here, that you brought us here on purpose, and you brought us here with a purpose. You've communicated to us that our lives matter, that what we do and how we live this life, it matters to you, and that you're not going to just give us a set of rules and leave us alone, but you're going to walk this path with us. And so God, as your church, help us to connect to that truth. And I pray that your presence and your blessing would be on them. And pray this every week, and it's about your connection to us. So we're going to pray once again. God, I pray that you would bless each and every person in this room and they're watching us online. That you would bless them and keep them. That you hold on tight to them. Yes. That you would make your face shine upon them. The image of a father looking at a baby. Shining of encouragement and acceptance and love. Make your face shine upon us. That you be gracious to us and you give us the space and handle our doubts and handle our worries and handle our pain. That you be gracious to us. lift up your countenance upon us. You give us rest and peace as we seek to connect to you in a deeper way. I pray all these things in the powerful name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Church, thank you for being a part of what we're doing here. I want you to encourage you. Allow the foolishness of God to become wisdom in your life.
Yes.
And give him space to operate. Let's be the church that's calling us to be.
Amen.